Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with another STAMPtember exclusive collaboration. Today's collab is with Pretty Pink Posh, and this is the Coffee Friends stamp set. Absolutely adorable. And like all of the limited edition collabs, these are one and done when they sell out. They are not restocked. They are limited edition. However, Pretty Pink Posh does have tons of super cute sets. This one being no exception. So, I took the coffee cup images from the set, and there's two different sizes of these little to-go cups, and I used all of them. And I am stamping them onto some Strathmore watercolor paper with VersaFine Clair Fallen Leaves ink. And then I put the backing sheet from the stamp set on top. This way I can just reposition all my stamps without having to clean them. So it just saves me a step. So I can move them around because I want to create a background with all of these to-go cups, and I want it to be kind of random. So I reposition the stamps. I'm going to ink them up and stamp them again. And then I end up stamping a couple like off camera just to fill out this entire background. Really simple, really random, purposefully random. So after I have stamped these, I am going to do some very simple watercoloring using my Karin Brushmarker Pros. That's why I chose this Strathmore watercolor paper and why I stamped with the VersaFine Clair ink. So my first step for watercoloring is I'm just going to do a very simple wash all around the background just to give it some color, just for fun. I'm not worried too much about it being like perfect. There are ways, if you are much more intentional, if you keep the edges wet, you can create a pretty seamless background with watercolor, but I'm not concerned about that. But also because I'm going to add splatter, and sometimes the texture is kind of nice when you get a bit of those like hard edges and whatnot. So with this, I just scribbled my marker onto my little plastic palette, and then I had added a bit of water, and then I'm just painting this with a larger paintbrush just to fill in this entire background. And then the rest of the watercoloring I take the marker direct to paper and then pull the color out with my little Tim Holtz detail water brush, because that gives me a little more control. Plus it enables me to get into, some of these little itty bitty areas. So I super sped this up in editing, but it's pretty self-explanatory. I scribble the marker, pull out the color with the little water brush, and I just do everything all at once. So I did all the lids with just a light gray. I decided to pull in a really deep purple. I'm still in a fall mood. So I went in with that, and then of course I'm going to just use a variety of browns to fill in the rest of these. And before I even started watercoloring the actual like to-go cups, this background was dry. You don't want to start watercoloring this if the background is still wet, because otherwise the colors can just start bleeding into each other, and then you really will have a hot mess. And I didn't heat emboss any of these images. Normally that's what I do, but since I was like stamping everything multiple times and this being the background, I was like, you know what? I can survive not having my security blanket of the heat embossing, because I do like it, those the raised edges, keep everything a little more contained. But as long as you let everything dry in between, it's good to go. So that's also why I do everything all at once. I did all the one color of the brown stripes at once. I did all of the bands on the coffee cups at once, etc. That way I'm moving around and everything has time to dry. So now that this is dry, this is where the splatter comes in. So I've got my ground espresso distress paint here, and I put some on my palette. I added some water to thin it out a bit so I can get more splatter, because I was in the mood to do a fairly heavy splatter with this. So swirled my little fan brush in there and then just splattered all over this background. And then I'll clean off my brush, wipe off my palette, and then I'm going to add more splatter. I'm going to use my Gansai Tambi Starry colors so I can get some gold splatter up in here too, because I was planning on gold heat embossing the main sentiment for this card. So I was like, oh, gold splatter just needs to be there. So I did all of that, and then I'm going to let that dry. And while that's drying, I've stamped the two little characters from the set onto the same Strathmore watercolor paper with that Fallen Leaves ink. I didn't heat emboss them, I know. But I'm going to color them with the Karin Brushmarker Pros. While I was doing this though, I was like, oh, these little characters specifically would be really good to practice like no line coloring with. Just the type of images, the way they're drawn, you know, with the little sections for their hair, everything like this. These are like the perfect ones. If you want to practice no line coloring, especially on little people images, this would be the way to go. I did contemplate it, but I wasn't in the mood. So instead, I just stamped them as is and then started coloring them and did the same as I did with the little to-go cups. I would just scribble on the Karin Brushmarker Pro and then just pull out the color with my water brush. I would go back in, add a bit more color if I needed to. And again, doing section by section. So I did the skin tone on one character, then the other, then I went back and did the hair on the other character, you know, and I'm going back and forth. This way it gives each little area time to dry so that I don't have to worry about the colors blending into each other and creating a hot mess. Because that's usually why I heat, well, that is why I heat emboss, is because I usually don't have the patience. But when I have more than one image like this, I can just flip back and forth between them, and that's enough time to dry because I'm not adding a ton of water with this little water brush. It's, you know, got its little bit, but it's just enough to pull it out, but it's not getting everything, you know, I'm not flooding each area. So once I had them colored, I took one of the pinks and scribbled that onto my palette just so I could get just a little bit of it with my water brush so I could add a bit of color to their cheeks. And yeah, once I've got that added, I can then let that dry. And then both of these I am going to cut out. And then the sentiment I'm going to heat emboss onto some purple cardstock. So I pulled that out and I put the purple cardstock into my MISTI. And I used my anti-static powder tool and centered that stamp onto the cardstock. Anti-static powder tool. I'm going to ink up the stamp with just some white pigment ink. Clear embossing ink will work great too. Anything that's just slow drying. So ink that up. I'm going to stamp that. I'm going to stamp it a couple times to make sure I got a good impression. And I'm going to coat this with Simon's Gold embossing powder. I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. And then off camera, I die cut this with a circle wafer die. And then my background is now completely dry. So I trim that down to slightly smaller than my A2 card base. My card base is Simon's Smooth White cardstock that I had cut down, and it's going to be a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. And then inside the card, I stamped a sentiment in the coffee cup. I don't know why my footage got wonky something, so I don't have that, but I'll show the inside of the card at the end of this video. So I adhered my painted background with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. I adhered the die cut sentiment as well with foam tape, and the little characters I popped up with Simon's foam squares. And then as a final little bit of embellishment, I have these pretty pink Posh little white sprinkles hearts. And I thought those would be kind of cute just to tie it all together. So I'm going to sprinkle those throughout this little card front here, and then I'll just adhere these into place with little dabs of craft tacky glue. And once these are adhered, this card will be complete. Well, when I pair it with one of Simon's dark chocolate envelopes, then it'll be complete. And yeah, on the inside of the card, I stamped the other sentiment from the set with that Fallen Leaves ink. And then I stamped the coffee cup and the hearts with Simon's Cappuccino and Iris inks. Just finished off the inside, and I got the cute little outside. And that's all there was to it. All the links to everything I used will be in the description box below the video. Thank you all so much for watching, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!